Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fifth Pilgrim Stays live experience on Christianity at the Gateway. In the next hour, we will try and give you a deeper appreciation of the history and Christian heritage of the Mumbai metropolitan region. As you all know by now, Pilgrim Stays is a new company focused on Christian travel and experiences. We were very fortunate that our website was inaugurated in February this year by His Eminence Oswald Cardinal Gracious in the presence of over 180 bishops and archbishops of India. Over the past few months of our existence, we've had a huge amount of support, love, suggestions, and we are humbled, energized, and enthused by this from all over India and across the globe. Without further ado, I would now like to introduce you to our speaker for today. Our speaker for today is Dr. Fleur D'Souza. Dr. Fleur, welcome to the live. Dr. Fleur was awarded the PhD degree in history by the University of Mumbai for her thesis, Thana under the Portuguese from 1534 to 1737, a socio-economic study in 2003. She is the Associate Professor and Head of Department of History at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai from 1996 till retirement in 2016. She also served as the Vice Principal of the Arts Faculty from 2005 to 2011. Invited to be on the Archdiocese of Mumbai's Heritage Cell, she worked with the team on the timeline of the history and heritage of the Archdiocese of Bombay at the museum, which is visible in Goregaon, Mumbai. She served as a member of the first Academic Council of the Maritime History Society of the Indian Navy and an Executive Council member of the Oral History Association of India. Welcome, Dr. Fleur, and thank you for taking the time to do this for us and our viewers across the globe.
Yeah. If I'm inaudible, please let me know.
Yeah, you're perfectly audible, Doctor.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Let me begin by saying I am particularly honored to be here, and I'm sure there are others more worthy than I am to give this talk. But nevertheless, I want to start by acknowledging the Pilgrim Stays, particularly Herman and Roshan, for their support. And the chance to speak on a theme that's very close to my heart. I would also like to thank Father Aniceto Pereira, Director of St. Pius Goringa, because if it were not for him, I would never have got into church history.
Dr. Fleur.
Father Warner D'Souza and Joynel Fernandez, Director and Assistant Director of the Archdiocese and Heritage Museum, Goregaon, and members of the CCPA HPC, the Archdiocese and Heritage Cell. I also would like to acknowledge Aisha, Perry, Jocelyn, and Joel for their technical support. So let me begin. We're just 3 days away from the feast of Our Lady of the Mount, Mount Mauli. The thing is that this year, no one will be allowed into that beautiful Gothic church, and people will definitely file past the oratory and stand and pray there. And it's worth knowing that this is one of the most important pilgrimage sites for the Catholics right from the year 1761. Even the Gazetteer, which is a secular source of 1882, remarks that the pilgrimage, the site of Mount Mary's is the best pilgrim site on Salsette Island and indeed in Bombay. Okay, so let's start then. History tells us that there were small communities of Nestorian Christians to be found at Kalyan as early as the 6th century of the current era and at Chaul, south of Mumbai. When you look at the city that there is today, this is a really outstanding image that you're seeing on your screen. You can't imagine that these were marshy islands with no produce except for salt fish and coconuts. Uh, the thriving community that we are talking about of Christians were on the neighboring islands of Salsette and further apart at Kalyan. Okay, so we the earliest reference we have is the according to the early Christian tradition. Now this is not substantiated by historians. Um, the idea of the Apostle Bartholomew coming to India, because in those days the concept of India was rather different. The concept of India included even parts of the Persian Gulf. So, though it's a very popular tradition, as a historian, I cannot say that I have found sufficient evidence to say that it was Bartholomew who evangelized people in this part of the world. We don't know how Christianity came here. Most probably, they came with much through the merchants, because from time immemorial, the west coast ports of India have had a thriving trade with West Asia and with through West Asia to lands further west. Um, if we take the next slide, can we have the next slide? Yes, so not much is known about the early Christian communities here, but we do know that was a Nestorian church and a community in Kalyan. Now we are on much surer ground when it comes to the 14th century. Can I have the next slide, please? Can you change the slide? Okay. Now, this is another very important reference of Cosmas, who identified that there was a community of Nestorian Christians at Kalyan. But we are on much surer ground when we come to the 14th century through two sources. One of the Dominican Jordanus of Severac, a Frenchman, and of the four of Friar Oderic, who came a few years later. Now, these are very extensive accounts of what took place in 1321. That's exactly 700, almost exactly 700 years ago. It is important for us to note there were a group of 15 Nestorian families living in Thana, which is 34 kilometers away from Bombay at that time. At that time, Thana was under the rule of the Muslims, and the Nestorians hosted these four missionaries. They were Thomas of Tolentino, James of Padua, Peter of Siena, and Demetrius of Tiflis. Now, they got into some argument with the Qazi of the town, and they were made to go into several trials by ordeal because they had blasphemed the prophet, and so people were paying for their blood. Ultimately, they were taken across the creek to Kalwa, and three of them were martyred there. This very, very vivid painting that you see comes from a 1938 painting by B. Rodert, based on Wadding's account of what happened. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, I'll try and point to my cursor. This is Thomas of Tolentino. He was 60 years old at the time of his martyrdom, and he is the one who is honored after that. Today, um, the martyrs are honored in murals in several churches in Europe. This is just one. This little box that you see here is in honor. The painting that you can't see it very clearly, and nor can you take a proper picture because they've cordoned off the high altar, and this is a very important church, and so they don't allow you to go very close by. So the picture is rather bad, but it's very clearly Peter of Siena with the palm frond in his hand, which marks it. It was an iconographic symbol of martyrdom in those days. So, besides Florence, there are other cities in Italy which have paintings depicting and honoring these martyrs. Okay. Now, the next year, the Franciscan friar Odoric of Pordenone, he uh, gathered up all the remains of the martyrs, wrapped them in napkins, and took a boat on his way to China. The story goes that the boat, there was a storm and people were rather nervous, and he kept quiet about the fact that he was carrying human bones because people are very suspicious about human bones. And so when he reached China, they were buried in a church there, and very very recently they were unearthed. Some of the bones were unearthed. Anyway, it was Thomas's skull that was taken back to Europe, and now it is preserved in this Cathedral of San Catervo in Tolentino in Italy. And the church in Thana has a fragment of this skull as a relic. So we are on much surer ground when it comes to knowing that there were 15 Christian families living in Thana. Many more. There were some of them in Sopara. There were more Christians in Bharuch. There were Christians at Chaul. So you have in the North Konkan evidence in the 14th century of Christian communities. When the Portuguese came, they did not find any churches or any leftovers of this Christian community. Okay, so now you can see the Cathedral of San Catervo in Tolentino. Archbishop Cardinal Gracious was invited to go there when, after the Eucharistic Congress, he paid a visit to Rome. Yeah. Can we have the next slide? Okay. Now we come to the Portuguese and their conquest of, we all know the story, their conquest of Goa in 1510, and in order for them to secure the trade routes, they were a maritime power. There is a famous historian who said the Portuguese Empire lived by the sea and died by the sea. So they were a maritime power, and their empire was just dots that skirted the map. And some of those dots were in our part of the world, and that is where you have the strong community of Roman Catholics that were to be found and that are to be found up to the present day. Yeah. Now, the two maps that you see here are what is called the Provincia do Norte. At one time, this Provincia do Norte was bigger than the island of Goa. So it was a huge territory all the way from Daman in the north to Chaul or Revdanda in the south. And it had, besides ports, it had extremely fertile lands. We will show you a slide later on and the account of Francois Peyrat to say all the products that went from here to Goa and to the rest of the world. Okay. Now, in 1534, in a treaty with Bahadur Shah, the Sultan of Gujarat, the Portuguese acquired Basin, Salsette, and Bombay. Salsette is the island on which Thana lies. Thana had its own independent chief, and he made a agreement with the Portuguese that he would pay tribute. And so all these lands, remember, Bahadur Shah was under threat from the Mughals at this point of time. And so he quickly made an agreement with the Portuguese. He gave over these territories, and that's how they came to this part of the world. Uh, Following their arrival in the North Konkan, in what is now today the Bombay or the Mumbai metropolitan region, Christian communities were formed, mostly evangelized by the religious orders. That is, the Franciscans, followed by the Jesuits, the Dominicans, and the Augustinians. Right through the 16th and 17th centuries, you have a number of churches that and parishes and converts on the islands of Basin, as Saul said, and to a lesser extent on the Bombay Islands. So let's look first at Basin, which was their capital city. Today, I don't call it Basin Fort, I call it the walled city of Basin, because it is the fort or the military part of the city is very small, whereas there's a huge wall that keeps the city safe. So there were several churches within the city. We aren't going to take each and every one of them. It would take us a long, long time. But I would just like to say that I'd just like to list the number of churches that there were. We'll take some of them. We won't take all. So there was the Matriz or the parish church. No, we'll just go back to that slide. Yeah, no, the previous one. I just want to say that nature and neglect have caused great damage to these stone buildings of the walled city of Basin, popularly called Basin Fort. In its heyday, the roads were paved. That's what the accounts tell us. The roads were paved with basalt, and 3 water tanks supplied drinking water to the city. Incidentally, they would have boats that would go across to the neighboring Dharavi island, across the creek, and where there was a freshwater spring, and boats would carry this fresh water back to the walled city so that the people could have clean and fresh drinking water. Now, uh, the Provincia do Norte is different from Goa because the Portuguese crown gave the noblemen and aristocrats and military generals vast lands as private holdings in a sort of what we would call like a feudal system, where they would have these vast lands and they could live off them. So the aristocrats of the Portuguese lived like petty kings. They would report once in a while to Basin, to Basai, but most often they lived in these manor houses, which were fortified at times and lived very, very luxurious lives um, uh, in these palatial manor houses. They had private chapels, they had slaves for domestic work and for defense. Their women, their wives, their daughters were carried in palanquins to church and back. They never ever stepped out of their homes. They were finely dressed in silk and muslin. And there are many descriptions of the grandeur of this capital city that we know of as Basin Fort today. Francis Peyrat, a French traveler in 1607, writes, "From Basin is exported the best timber. Till today, if you're around Basin, you will see the hillsides clothed in teak. So, very, very fine quality timber. It also yields a building stone that is fine and hard as granite. And I never saw columns and pillars entire stone so large as in this place. All the churches and sumptuous palaces of Goa are built with stone. I have a constant fight with my geology department. Oh, why would they want to take the stone to Goa? Goa has its own stone. So I said, well, we have the documents to prove that the stone taken from Basin, as we know, is volcanic rock and it's hard, and some of it is easy to carve, others are not, but it's strong and durable. And yes, we have documentary evidence to prove that even the facade of Bojesu in Goa had stone that came from Basin. Till today, if you go to the island of Dharavi, you will see an old quarry, and you can see huge cutout blocks that would have made its way by river to Basin, and then from there onwards to Goa and wherever else they needed the stone. Um, the previous picture was of the Franciscan Church, one of the earliest, and uh, a very fine church indeed. If I could just show you the previous, no, the Franciscan Church, that is before this, before this, yeah. Look at this arch. Look at this arch. When we were college students, this arch was a freestanding arch. Today, because they are afraid it's going to collapse, the archaeological survey has put in some concrete to keep it here. But look at the wide span of this arch. It was a fabulous church. Oh, all on the ground here and in the cloister next door, you can see gravestones. And if you have the patience to look at these gravestones, many of these bear the coats of arms of the noblemen who must have lived and died here. There are quite a few studies that have looked at these coats of arms and identified them with royal and aristocratic families in Portugal. So this makes for very interesting study, except that this whole complex is uh, really given into neglect. Uh, you can see the uh, creepers growing out of the walls, and these dig into the stones and loosen them, and the whole place is in a very sorry state. We'll go to the next slide, and this one this one is the Jesuit Church. The Jesuit Church today is the only church that has a roof, and that was done in the last few years. The people of Basin appealed to the government and managed to roof this church. At one time, it had such a beautiful ceiling. According to Bishop Herber, who visited in 1825, he said it was an example of a coved ceiling with the finest timber and gilded. You can imagine how grand it must have been that even the ceiling had gold on it. Today it's in a sorry state, but you will see, we don't have a proper picture here, but here and here are symbols of the sun and moon, which are very important to Christian iconography. To the left, to the right over here, you can see this doorway, and it has the Jesuit symbol on it. It leads to the Jesuit Cloister, a lovely quadrangle. It's very beautiful, still can be imagined, with the houses of the Jesuit and the priests who live there, their living quarters, their teaching places, for their library, their refectory. A lot of it is destroyed today, but still, if you have a little bit of imagination, it can take you back to the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. Uh, can we have the next slide? Yeah. Now, from we could go on about Basin Fort. There's no end talking about Basin Fort. But from now, we go to just to one other ruined city, also the walled city of uh, Chaul or Revdanda. This is just just south of Bombay. Once again, a beautiful example of urbanization and very, very grand churches, but so badly destroyed that there are houses built within this complex. We have a picture of a bungalow, a modern bungalow built with the arch of the sanctuary of a church as the gateway to the bungalow. So the buildings of Chawla, with the exception of the surrounding wall, are almost completely destroyed. Um, yeah. Now we go from the Basin Fort, the missionaries, the orders, the religious orders. Most of this area was evangelized by the religious orders. First the Franciscans, then the Jesuits, followed by the Dominicans, the Augustinians, and then you also have a smaller group called the Hospitallers of St. John, who were mostly in the medical field. But the Franciscans and the Jesuits were really very um, ardent in their in their evangelization. And this is a picture of one of the first parishes, that is Sandor. Yeah, um, the early one of the early parishes of the Jesuits, Sandor. And from here, like it was like a kind of a mother church. From here, you have other churches that were um, that were founded. This is a tiny picture of the interior, but it has these very grand and ornate uh, backdrops to the altars that are called retibles, which are in the Baroque ornamental style. And you have this huge figure of St. Thomas in the center. Next. Yeah. Another very important church was the Church of the Holy Spirit at Nandakal, but this was a Franciscan church. Many of one thing I'd like to make very clear is that very often we have the dates of these churches which are highly disputed, because remember that the documents were destroyed when the churches were burnt down. Obviously, whatever manuscripts survived went to Goa and then to Lisbon. But from these churches itself, very, very few records can be found. So, very often we do not have the exact dates of the foundations of these churches. But this is a Franciscan church, and the Franciscans were highly devoted in their evangelizing work. Uh, but there's a very interesting story connected with the Church of Nandakal. They say that it was spared destruction in the War of 1739, because when the soldiers and the marauding armies came to destroy it, a swarm of bees from the nearby forest attacked the soldiers and they ran away, and the church was spared. We have no way to verify this, but this is the local legend. Today, Our Lady of Grace Papdi is the cathedral ever since the Diocese of uh, Vasai was separated from the Archdiocese of Bombay. So, Our Lady of Grace Papdi, 1574, the second parish built outside the fort and run by the Jesuits of the Basin Fort. It had the sponsorship of many of the aristocrats who lived in the fort and who acted as godfathers to the new converts um, when they were baptized. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. This is in Michael's Church, Manikpur, which is also a Jesuit church built in 1606. And this was one of the offshoots of the Church of Sandor as the population grew and the people found it difficult to travel all the way to Sandor. So the Jesuits managed to get a plot of land supported very much by people who donated money to buy the land. And this church is dedicated to Saint Michael the Archangel. You will see him standing rather imposingly here. And this is a highly gilded altar that very profusely carved um, um, with Saint Michael as the central figure. Uh, Yeah. One of the first churches to be destroyed in the War of 1739. It was rebuilt in 1783 and taken over by the secular clergy when the Jesuits, who were Europeans, had to leave. Yeah. Now, from the island of Basin, we move over to the island of Salsette. And if you just cross the creek by boat, you will come to the beautiful island of Dharavi. The island of people mix it up and people confuse it with the slum Dharavi. It's not so. This is an island Dharavi that's just opposite Basin. It has the churches of Manori and Gorai on the one end, and this church, Dongri, on the Our Lady of Bethlehem on the other end. Our Lady of Bethlehem is one of those few churches that has not been tampered with. You know, you have many times churches being renovated. So you see this beautiful gem of a church almost untouched, and it's really worth uh, going and visiting Dongri. It's high up on the hill. It has a lovely view, and very close to this church a, is a hermitage, which was also a watchtower, used as a watchtower. And all along the hill to this hermitage were crosses that people say were taken from Bandra. Bandra had a series of these crosses where devoted parishioners would make the way of the cross. Now, these have, for some reason, been taken to Dongri and they line the road up to the hermitage. This is another very, very popular church, and it has the largest number of parishioners. It is the Church of Our Lady of the Sea at Uttan. It has some very beautiful ceilings and uh, uh, sculptural decoration, very much in the Baroque style. Yeah. A little bit about the people of Dharavi Island. The whole island of Salsette has what have people that we know of today as the East Indians. They were not called East Indians before 1887. They've just taken that name in 1887 to distinguish themselves from other Catholics who were coming in from Goa and from Mangalore. So they felt that they had to distinguish themselves, so they called themselves East Indian. Even the Gazetteer of 1882 um, calls them Christians. They call them Portuguese Christians, they call them Salsette Christians, call them Thana Christians, and their Hindu neighbors call them Christaos, and distinguish them very interestingly, distinguish them from the um, Christians, or let's say the British. They call the British Church the Saheb Lok Church, but they called the people of the these islands, they call them Christians and Christaus. So they were very much accepted as Christians right through the centuries. On this island is also a very, very recently introduced museum, small, very tiny little museum dedicated to Kaka Baptista. Kaka Baptista is worked very closely with Lokmanya Tilak, and especially was involved with what was called the Home Rule movement. He went on to being serving the Bombay Municipal Corporation, in those days the Bombay Municipality, and working for the people. Next, can be, yeah. Uh, these are the pictures taken in the museum. Next, yeah. Mention must be made of Saint Gonzalo Garcia, the patron saint of the East Indian community, who was one of the first martyrs that was born in India, born in Basin, and who was martyred in Nagasaki in Japan. He's the first Indian saint to be canonized. There's a small shrine, a small church now. Now we come to something that's really close to my heart because this is my parish church, and it has a very, very interesting history because it remains the only church that has all three altars still preserved in what are called, uh, the Baroque style of ornamentation. The whole church has been the facade of the church has been renovated several times, so we can't call that the original facade. The recent renovation in 2015 attempted to stay close to the way the church was built originally, to the lime plaster, and um, to looking after these altars. This is a Franciscan church. It was part of the Franciscan friary. The actual parish church of St. John the Baptist was destroyed in the war of 1737 to 1739. And after the war, the people occupied St. Anthony's Church. By this time, the friars had to leave because they were Europeans, and the church now is um, dedicated to St. John the Baptist. Can we have the next slide? So now we have moved over from Basin to Salsette. This is a very, very interesting church because it is not open to us. You can only visit this church once a year, in May, on the second Sunday of May, when, because the people of Marol have begged and fought, the authorities allow, because this is a high security area called the Seeps complex, um, and they only allow you to go here once a year. What you're seeing here are the remains of the porch. Interestingly, these beautiful Romanesque arches, are still there. I've seen very few churches with porches like this, just one in Dew. The Franciscan Church has a porch which is similar to this. But of course, we can't say because the whole roof and everything has collapsed. The church is roofless, but if you walk and at your own risk over the dead leaves and the rubble and the dead, the broken stone, you can see the ruins of the Jesuit house next door. Very interestingly, the Jesuit seal, the flaming arch, the flaming sun with the IHS, is still seen on the residence doorway. The sacristy and leading up to the Jesuit house must have had a second story, and you can still see the kind of tiles embedded in the corners, though the actual roof has gone. Now, I don't know whether you can notice this over here. Sorry. This here is what is called a Baobab tree. Now, the Baobab tree is a native of Africa. This particular complex has around 7 mighty They're huge. They're awesome. Three of us stood along this trunk and we still couldn't cover it. They are huge, awesome trees and must have been standing there for centuries. So there are lots of baobab trees and very interesting. And there is a lake close by, but unfortunately, this is out of bounds to us. Next, the church had to be abandoned because of an epidemic and plague. Next, how are we doing for time? I've got to keep looking at the time. Okay, then one of the, how are we doing for time, Roshan?
About 15 minutes, Doctor,
Okay,
you're good.
yes, so I'll have to go a little faster then. Um, Here we have a sketch of the College of St. Anne at Bandra, Santa Ana, which no longer stands because I would like you to look here and see it has a almost fortified wall. It's a very, very poor sketch. Please forgive us. But this is the only picture that we have of Santa Ana, and it is dated. You can't see it in this picture. It is dated 1718. Santa Ana was the first parish of the Jesuits in Bandra. It stood very close to the present Bandra railway station, and it had cannons. It was a fortified church because it overlooked the creek. And on the other side of the creek was the Basin Fort, or by this time, please remember, islands of Bombay had gone over to the British, to the English. They had put up their forts ringing the island, and Mahim Fort overlooked here. Now, when the war took place, the English uh, promised the Portuguese help, but as a result, they had to destroy this church because they did not want the ammunition and the cannons to fall into the hands of the Marathas. So this church had to be abandoned, it had to be destroyed, and the parishioners therefore had to move to St. Andrews uh, for their spiritual needs. This was a Jesuit church. And next, yeah. This is St. Andrew's Church, and the cross that you see here, very, very interesting indeed. This cross stood at Santa Ana, and it was later on taken to um, St. Andrew's Banter, where it still stands. It has very interesting moldings, almost it's like the story of the Bible etched onto it. So it's, it's a wonderful cross to examine. The most famous pilgrimage spot on the island of Salsette is Mount Mary. As I said, this is the third church in the series. This is the latest of churches because from Jesuit records, we know that it started off as a very humble shrine where the Jesuit fathers would climb up the hill, trudge up the hill, and sit there in meditation because that's what they were asked to do. And but they found people coming there, and so more and more people gathered, and soon it became a pilgrimage spot. And today there's no stopping the pilgrims who go to Mount Mary. What you're seeing is a Gothic uh, sort of church, and I hope I have time a little later to tell you how the churches of Bombay now took an interest in the Gothic architectural language to build their churches. But we'll talk about that later. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, this is also Our Lady of Gloria Church in Mazagon, in Baikala. The original church was located in Mazagon, very just opposite Mazagon Docks. But when the land was acquired for the Bombay Port Trust, the church had to be shifted So it was demolished, and a plot of land was given to the Archdiocese, very close to Baikla Station, and this huge Gothic uh, church emerged just about 100 years ago. Um, the interesting thing, people, is that this church has recently been restored by two of the architects of the Archdiocesan Heritage Committee, and it has won the UNESCO award for UNESCO Asia Pacific Award uh, for of Merit of 2019 for cultural heritage conservation. Uh, so hats off to conservation architects Ainsley Lewis and David Cardoz, who have brought uh, this church back to life. It took them many, many years because it had several problems. The stained glass windows had to be redone, the roof had to be redone. It was a painstaking work, but it was done just 2 years ago. It was, yeah. Um, Another church. Now we have three churches in Bombay built within a few years of each other, and all three use the language of Gothic architecture. Uh, they gave up the Indo-Portuguese style, which was, rounded arches, and they all took up pointed arches or the lancet arches, the towering steeples. Um, it became very fashionable to have Gothic architecture. So much so that in some churches they even changed the shape of the windows from the round arches or the classical or the Romanesque arches to these pointed lancet arches. But the cathedral at Woodhouse is is a Gothic basalt built in stone with a high central nave and lower aisles all covered with brick walls. It is the Church of the Holy Name of Jesus, inaugurated in 1905. It had a British architect, Sir Walter Ashton Chambers, and it was um, known as the early decorated in English architecture. Please remember, I have no time to go into this, but at this point of time, the Archdiocese of Bombay shared the spiritual shared spiritual work with the Archdiocese of Daman. So you had an Archdiocese of Daman and you have the Archdiocese of Bombay existing in the same space. It led to a lot of acrimony. It led to a lot of very, um, very great, a great divide in the population. But that's another story altogether. Okay. We thought we'd take one of the Anglican churches, and this is St. Thomas's Cathedral. It was opened for divine service in 1718. Once again, the tower that you see here has undergone many changes, and it was though the foundation stone was laid under in 1676, it was left neglected. Lots of stories connected with this church. By the way, uh, during British times, all distances were calculated from St. Thomas's Cathedral. So it would, if you so zero was St. Thomas's Cathedral, and they had 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles, 6 miles. So if you found a milestone, you should know how far you were from St. Thomas's Cathedral. So this was 0 point Bombay during the British time. Very interestingly, in the compound of St. Thomas's is a fountain designed by Sir Gilbert Scott, but paid for by a Parsi merchant called Mr. Ready Money. So this is a fascinating church to visit because it's like a virtual history book, history storybook of the history of Bombay and English. It's really worth a visit for several reasons. You can even sit in the chair where Mother Teresa sat and prayed if you ever visit this church. Of course, one church that changed the taste of people of Bombay to the Gothic style is this church we call the Afghan Church, a huge, towering church meant to be a symbol of British power, British might. Though, of course, it memorializes one of the great defeats of the British in the Asian subcontinent because they could never ever conquer Afghanistan. Many of their soldiers laid down their lives. It is said that they wanted to memorialize their sacrifice, and so this church was built. Okay, can we go now to the next slide? Yeah. Um, Enough of churches. What are the other contributions of the Christian community to the city of Bombay? Um, I'd like to tail off by saying that the museum or Archdiocesan Heritage Museum, located in the campus of St. Paul Pius X College at Gurgaon, is really worth a visit. It's tiny. It has won awards for its design, but it carefully puts together a history of the Catholicism in this part of the world and some of the artifacts that came from the churches um, here. It's really worth a visit to anybody doing a pilgrimage to Bombay. Next, yeah, here are some of the artifacts that you see. This here in this lineup are the beautiful set of paintings by that famous Goan artist called Angelo de Fonseca. Angelo de Fonseca presented uh, biblical themes, gospel themes in a very Indian style. Uh, uh, this museum has a few paintings, though the majority of the paintings of Angelo de Fonseca are to be found in Goa. And you have some beautiful crucifixes. This is a processional banner with St. Francis Xavier there that came from St. Francis Xavier's Church in Dabul. And this is a part of the altar of the church of Manoli. And this is a little auditorium where you can have lectures and things. Um, we have to talk about the contribution of the Feast of Catholics to education in the city of Bombay, especially higher education. We all know that St. Xavier still ranks as one of the top institutions in the city of Bombay and maybe also in the country. Next, we cannot forget the premier institute for girls, Sophia College for Women, doing excellent work when it comes to educating women, research, etc. So these are the two oldest colleges. There are other colleges today. Right? I want to end by talking about the 38th International Eucharistic Congress. There's that slide, yes. Um, we cannot forget the 38th International Eucharistic Congress held in Bombay in 1964. This was a landmark for not only the church in India but also for India because it sort of underscored independent India's commitment to a secular democracy and the Archdiocese of Bombay's leading position in the country. The first Pope to visit India met rapturous crowds. You can see the crowds that gathered here. 60 committees and task force, a force of around 500 members
hundreds of volunteers. The Congress was a great manifestation of faith unique in India's history. The resounding success of the Congress was a testament to the organization's still tireless efforts of hundreds of people and the cosmopolitan fabric of the city of Bombay. We cannot, we don't know whether we will ever be able to. I just want to end by saying that besides education, there are hospitals and dispensaries and clinics that are numbering 229. There are social welfare centers, aged homes, orphanages, and so much more that the Christians of this metropolitan area have contributed. In conclusion, the Mumbai metropolitan region incorporates several municipal corporations, towns, and villages. The indigenous Christians of the area have maintained their faiths through the centuries. The war of 1737-1739 destroyed places of worship and left the population without their spiritual leaders who had to leave immediately as they were European. Many incentives drew people to reconvert to Hinduism. But we have to say that the Maratha government and the British government that followed supported the churches and their spiritual leaders. And even though it took time to build up the stone and mortar churches, the faith of the people stayed strong. In the 19th and 20th centuries, a number of Christian institutions, both religious and secular, serve the multi religious, multilingual population that makes up the demographic of this megalopolis that is Mumbai. The heritage presented in today's slideshow is an expression of faith. We could not tell you, take each and every church. I'm sorry for that. But it's an expression of faith. The faith which is broad in its outlook and inclusive in its outreach. A faith that includes people of all communities, all languages. The Christian community continues to serve the people of the burgeoning metropolis in many ways, but chiefly through education and health services. This Christian community at the gateway took birth centuries ago, but it continues to remain relevant to the present day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fleur, for taking the time out to share your knowledge with the rest of the community and people at large. We really appreciate you doing this, and you are I personally, after listening to your talk, now regret that during my time in Bombay, I didn't take the time out, or I didn't have the knowledge that such places existed, or haven't gone and seen them, So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I thank you. We've got, it's an incredible history. And, I look forward personally when I'm in Bombay next to be able to visit some of these places myself. Dr. Fleur, because of, we've got so many comments. I'm just putting a few of them on screen, from people who are appreciating your talk, and I will compile some of these and send them to you. We've had so many people logging in from across the globe. A few, I want to ask you, because we have very limited time. I wanted to ask you a little bit about maybe one or two questions which were interesting, which came in. So, initially you have, the East Indian community, and today when their contribution to Bombay has been immense.
Yes.
When I was, I spent a few years in Bombay studying there, and you still have those quaint East Indian villages, which I've noticed, at least in Bandra, Marol, and Vasai, to a certain extent. How did they end up in these three different corners of Mumbai?
Oh, there are Christian communities and Gauthans all over. What you're
Oh, okay.
seeing with the, I mean, in my lifetime, with the influx in from the 1980s onwards, you have a tremendous influx of people into the city of Bombay. It became from a city, it became a metropolis,
Right,
and one by one, the pressure of the land sharks, you
right.
know, was
Oh,
tremendous. So you have these housing colonies, and to
right,
me, the Christians are scattered like dust
right.
now. They
Got
can't
it.
compete. They can't compete. They're scattered. Only a
Right.
few governments now have woken up to preserve their culture.
Right.
There is
And
quite a
what would you
movement.
suggest, Dr. Fleur, are interesting Gautans to go and see, you know?
Yeah, so there is right in South Bombay, there is Matapakadi. Then there is Kotachi Wadi. That's in South Mumbai. Then, of course, in Bandra, you have the villages of Ranwar, and you have Pali. Not much left, but Ranwar is definitely. Then after that, the best is Dharavi Island. And
Okay. Got it.
fast
Right.
changing, fast
Right.
disappearing. The land sharks are building a bridge. They're building two bridges. Once
Right.
those bridges come up, the life of these people will change forever. So if you get a chance, go there before that happens. We've been
Right.
studying that very, very closely. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Fleur, also, it's, the contribution that you see, as you say, as you rightly pointed out, there's schools and the colleges of higher education, but you also see a lot of contribution in healthcare, as you touched upon. And some of the most prestigious hospitals in Bombay or Mumbai are Christian hospitals. When was this during the Portuguese time or the English time? When did, or was they just donations from the faithful?
Yes. During the Portuguese time, the medical needs were attended to by the missionaries themselves. So
Right,
very often, like in Basin, it was at least for the Portuguese themselves. They were
right,
very well equipped with hospitals, you know, and the Franciscans had brothers who would regularly dole out herbal medicines, etc. It's very interesting, and few people know this, but the Peshwas, the conquerors of uh, the ones who were most powerful, they uh, had they were stricken with tuberculosis,
okay,
and we have evidence of the Franciscan brothers who were attending to their medical needs.
okay, nice.
Yes, so you know the missionaries, especially the religious orders, took care, but in a very informal way.
Right,
It's not as organized as in Goa. It was not as organized as in Goa.
right,
Yeah.
got it.
Then
So
when you
all of
come to the
newer
side,
churches, all these newer hospitals are built, I guess, more from donations from the faithful since the
yes,
1900s. Yes, yeah,
yes,
got it.
yes.
Got it. And question here from Kevin Fernandez, that apart from East Indians, are other people welcome to visit the churches on Dharavi Island?
Of course,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah,
Whatever gave it that. Uh, of course. In fact, if you, now on the first Sunday of October, you have a lovely festival where the corn is blessed by the priests. So the
right,
priest goes out to the field, blesses the corn in the field, the paddy. Then they
right,
bring sheaves of paddy. They take it to offer it at the altar. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience to see the whole community out offering the fruits of the land, and celebrating the harvest festival. Yeah.
right. Thank you, Dr. Fleur. That brings us to, I will plug our next event, which is on the 8th of September. We are doing another off the schedule Facebook Live. with the in joint we're doing it jointly with another Facebook community called the Hungry Mangi, and it's on the Feast of Nativity, which is very widely celebrated, as you mentioned, across also all the agrarian societies on the coast, which are Christian. I'm sure a lot of people would find that also very interesting. So please do tune in on the 8th of September for that Facebook Live. With this, I'd like to close this webinar. I want to thank Dr. Fleur on behalf of myself, Ivan, Anil, and Nigel, we are all the partners at Pilgrim Stays. I'd like to thank the audience for being here, supporting us, and paying attention during this talk. And thank you to all the people who work behind the scenes, like Herman, and Dr. Flores also had technical assistance from some of her support crew. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you soon on the 8th of September. Thank you.